Hey now, good morning, PASW. Staff, clients, and friends joining us. We always need friends joining us, right? Welcome to Wednesday's class. We looked at Benjamin Britten yesterday, great English composer, did all those wonderful little things involving children's choir and boys choir, and just tons of operas and all that stuff. So that was a lot of fun. Your film scoring results are in for Breakfast at Tiffany's. Terrific. You guys really knocked it out of the park with this one. Today we're going to do a little jazz history about a saxophonist that, changed music. Somebody that we've talked about a little bit before, but I want to get more in depth into this really melodic, great saxophonist. Today we're going to be looking at Cannonball Adderley. Cannonball Adderley. Cannonball is it was not his real name. He was called Cannonball because of his big appetite, and he was a big force for sure. Jazz alto saxophone. So we know the saxophone, right? And I think most of us know that there's alto saxophone, which is the higher register, tenor, which is a little bit lower, baritone, which is the lowest, and I guess I'm going not in the right order, and then the highest is soprano. So there's 4 types of saxophone. They all have the same fingering, so if you can play one, you can play all of them. Now, who was the other famous alto saxophone player? Charlie Parker. Charlie Parker is probably, we've talked about him a lot, kind of the king of bebop. He plays alto. Cannonball is going to be playing alto. We've talked about John Coltrane. Coltrane plays tenor saxophone. So they're just different registers of high, low, and all that stuff. So just wanted to kind of clarify. So we're going to be talking about the alto saxophone. This is what Cannonball plays, and part of the hard bop era of the 50s and 60s, but was also very interested in education and did a lot. Seemed like a really great guy that wanted to spread his knowledge and stuff. So, but a very melodic player, and in the sense of traditional jazz music. So it'll be very lovely to hear. So let's get into Cannonball. born in 1928 in Tampa, Florida. So let's leave the UK and go to Florida. Just as pretty, just as nice, and came from a musical family. His dad was a trumpet player. And it's worth mentioning that Cannonball's brother Nat, his younger brother, was a brilliant trumpet player as well. It's rare to have two siblings that, not rare, but a little bit rare, that were each independently, brilliant jazz musicians. And they played together a lot, as we'll see. But his brother, brilliant jazz trumpet player, and Cannonball, was great. So they played a lot together. They played with Ray Charles when he was living in Tallahassee during the 1940s. But Cannonball really pursued a music education. He studied music at Florida A&M, where his parents were teachers there, and became the band director at the high school in Fort Lauderdale. A position he had until 1950. He was kind of, and when he went to New York in 1955, he wanted to continue his master's studies, his musical studies in the instrument and composition. But that kind of ended with him being brought to a gig. So the story goes that he went to pursue graduate studies at the New York conservatories, and one night in 1955, his friend Oscar Pettiford, who was a bass player, took him to the Cafe Bohemia, which was one of the biggest jazz clubs in the world at that time, and he sat in for the gig, and after that, the whole New York scene was abuzz with this guy who was the new Charlie Parker. So in 1955, it's interesting because that's the year that Charlie Parker dies. So people perhaps were looking for a new alto saxophonist to not take his place, but to continue on in the tradition. Here's a little bit of Charlie Parker, just so you know kind of what we're listening to. So Cannonball's going to take some of that, some of his sound, but he's really going to make a whole new sound. And what we're going to talk about is with all artists, but for this purpose, for jazz, it's so important to have your own sound. Many of the guys that we've talked about, within a first measure or two measures, oh, that's Lee Morgan, oh, that's Clifford Brown, oh, that's John Coltrane. They have their sound. That's what it is. Whether it's a pleasant sound or whether it's not pleasant to you, it's instantly identifiable, which is something I think all artists strive for. So Cannonball comes into the year where Charlie Parker's died into the jazz scene and blows up the jazz scene. And this catches the attention of Miles Davis. So let's just right now look at our timeline. This is Cannonball's going, he's living the same time as Eric Dolphy, but he's not sounding anything like Eric Dolphy. Eric Dolphy's a little bit more in the free jazz avant-garde era of all the bouncing intervals but yet still playing the alto saxophone, which is what Cannonball plays. But his tone is so different. It's more squeaky and different. John Coltrane's right there with Cannonball, but he's playing tenor saxophone. He's playing less bluesy like. As we'll hear, Cannonball is really I don't want to say a blues saxophone player, but uses more blues elements. Miles Davis is right there too, and Charlie Parker, as we just talked about, kind of is fading. So this is when bebop is in the 40s and the 50s, and then mid 50s we start going into hard bop, right? And then cool jazz in the late 50s with what? Kind of Blue in 1959. And guess who was on Kind of Blue? Cannonball, because Miles took notice of Cannonball's brilliance on the alto saxophone and said, I need to get this guy in my band. And it was kind of unusual to have two saxophones on a recording session on an album, but how can you not have Coltrane and Cannonball together? Cannonball goes on to play with great bossa nova artists, and he goes on to play with Bill Evans, which he played with on the Kind of Blue session. Such a melodic player. And his interest as an educator came across in the recordings. He would talk a lot. On interviews, he would do.
Somebody walked up on the street to you and said, "I'm going to make a musical career for myself. I can play any kind of music." What would you advise them to play?
I advise them to play what they feel, but if they want to survive in the business, they better make it kind of simple.
In 1962, he marries the actress Olga James. After Kinda Blue, he goes with his brother to form, with his brother Nat Adderley, to form the quintet featuring Cannonball on sax and his brother on trumpet. And it wasn't as successful, so he goes and develops the sextet, which they start playing, and they become hugely successful. His most successful song, maybe his most accessible song, is in 1966 with Mercy, Mercy, Mercy. You've probably heard this. This is written by the Austrian-born pianist Joe Zawinul. Such a fun song, something that a lot of middle school players learn when they're starting to play jazz because it's very simple. Cannonball struggled with diabetes during his life, and in 1975 dies from a stroke. Died 4 weeks later in 1975 in Gary, Indiana. He was only 46 years old, so he died way too young. really, really too bad. I'm curious to know what kind of sound do you guys hear during this? I mean, he's playing fast like Charlie Parker, but and he's got the technicality down because he can run through these lines so effortlessly. You hear a lot of decoration around the notes, or it's not just notes, but it's swooping and kind of these falls and these bluesy falls. I mean, he doesn't sound like Coltrane in that regards at all. He's playing more traditional jazz than Coltrane. There's blues harmonies. There's a rich tone. He tongues a lot of the notes. We talked about tonguing with Clifford Brown. Well, tonguing on the saxophone is a little bit different. He articulates them brilliant, but his bluesy sound is so clean and pure. Just his solo on Autumn Leaves with the Miles Davis track is so brilliant. Supposedly he was a very kind and generous man, and very generous to younger musicians, and very articulate spokesman as for education and just serving the greater good for music. So just a small little taste of Cannonball Adderley and his brilliance. So hope you enjoyed that. One of my favorite saxophone players, so lyrical, such a lyrical saxophone player, such a melodic player, and one of my favorites. So that's Cannonball. Tomorrow we're going to be going a little bit into some scandalous underground LA history. So it won't be too scary. It's okay. But it's going to be really a fun little thing I have planned. But that's Cannonball Adderley. Great, great player. Would love at some point to do a class on his brother Nat, because his brother Nat is just as brilliant on the trumpet. Yeah, brothers playing incredible jazz at the same time. Pretty rare. So, okay, that's it. Love you, miss you, and see you tomorrow. Okay, bye.